Center now for about 4 months and had in that time, I think, about 5 introductions from Frank. And they've all gone well. You don't always get that when you do as much public speaking as I do. I was actually in Atlanta a couple of years ago, and a guy I did not know got up to introduce me. And what he meant to say was that I was a retired congressman, but he slipped and called me a recovering congressman. I've actually used that ever since. Been clean for about 15 years now. But part of my rehab here at the center is to help put together the kinds of panels that we had this morning. And we had an extraordinary discussion with some very distinguished panelists. And I want to quickly recap what happened, because obviously this is a great way to kind of introduce the very important award we're giving to Roger Ailes today. Let me start with the second panel first, which was called Escalating Violence Against Political and Religious Expression. It involved the former Venezuelan journalist Vilma Petrache, who is unfortunately now living in Miami because of what the events are like in Venezuela, and Claudia Rosset, whom I'm sure you know very well from her many journalistic contributions. But let me start with something that she said, because I think it kind of sets the tone for the discussion and for today and for the times that we live in. She essentially said that we seem to be moving from a period where the operating ethic was, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, to leading from behind. And that, I think, tells a tale in terms of how we interpret the news, how our government conducts policy, and how we react to both. And it put me in mind of something. It just so happened this weekend I was doing a show on MSNBC, and I bumped into an old colleague of mine, Tom Ridge, the former member of Congress, former governor of Pennsylvania, but most specifically the first director of Homeland Security. And we were talking about Iran, and he told me of a conversation he had with the wife, the widow, I should say, of the assassinated Lebanese premier, Rafiq Hariri. And he was asking her not too long ago, what do we seem to be doing wrong in the Middle East and elsewhere? And she said, well, Governor, we want to respect you. We don't have to like you. And that, I think, is very much part and parcel of what we're seeing as we conduct policy around the world and how we report it. Whether or not we are turning a blind eye to what is actually happening in Venezuela, and as Vilma reported today, there is a very strong Hezbollah presence in Venezuela, not just active, but recruiting and expanding. And of course, I'll leave you to conclude what we're doing in the Middle East and whether or not we're sending the right signals or exactly all the wrong ones. But this whole question of leading from behind, and this is another thing that Claudia said that I think is particularly important for all of us here today. Regardless of what regime you are trying to change or overthrow or accommodate, it seems to be the overriding concern of the people beneath that government is always, please tell the truth. And the question is, are we really doing that, not just necessarily around the world as we cover foreign theaters, but whether or not we're doing this at home? And this leads to the first panel this morning that I was fortunate enough to moderate, which is about growing censorship of free speech. And on that panel we had somebody I'm sure you all know very well, Andrew McCarthy, whom you read in National Review, and the former special prosecutor of Sheikh Abdul Rahman. Yes. And a distinguished colleague of ours at the Center for Security Policy, Brooke Goldstein, who has just written a very important new book. This is the third time I've said this now, Brooke. Lawfare, which you can buy for a mere $10 in the lobby, but more to the point, covers something that I don't really think we're paying enough attention to, which is the whole question of using our laws as a kind of subtle jihad against our legal system, suing people like Mark Stein and Rachel Ehrenfeld and various organizations in this country to keep them from speaking out against totalitarianism, whether it is expressed through communism or Islamism or whatever. They were accompanied by Sam Nunberg of the Legal Project, who went on to talk about the kinds of dumbing down that we're doing in this country right now when, for example, the FBI decides to purge documents from their files, or the Homeland Security Department decides to no longer use the words that terrorists use to describe themselves, such as Sharia and jihad and Islamic radicalism. All of these were part and parcel of a discussion this morning. All of these, I think, raise more questions than they answer, but I think that's probably why we are here today. But again, going back to what Claudia said, there are, I think, some questions that we'll take away from this ceremony today, and certainly from the panel this morning, that I want to leave you with. And they are, what does it all mean? And why does it matter? And what can we do about it? And at that point, I think we have to pull back from whatever blame we might lay at the feet of government or the feet of the media and say, what are we doing about it? And I'll just close with an experience in my own life. I'm married to a woman who used to be in journalism, an Entertainment Tonight, and consistently throughout my political career and almost throughout all of my broadcasting career, couldn't have cared less about politics. Had nothing to do with any of my campaigns, didn't even pay much attention to what I said on the radio, and really had no interest. As a matter of fact, even as a journalist throughout her entire career, the most controversial issue she had ever covered was the death of Liberace. However, she met Frank Gaffney. She started listening to people like Andy McCarthy. She started reading people like Patrick Poole without much provocation from me, and has now become very active in making sure we do tell the truth. And it just occurs to me that if we do our job at the center and you do your job in the media and those of you in government do your job, the real dividend will be more citizens who get up and say, wait a minute, that's wrong, let's change it. That's really what we did this morning, and that really concludes what I wanted to tell you. And Frank, I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.